Okay, we are in the Sumchus conversation. I'm calling it the Sumchus conversation because the Chachamim obviously appear, it's a generic term, it appears in multiple conversations. So, what the Gemorah is doing, as it will do still one more time after this. So far we've done it with Ben Nanas, we're now doing it with Sumchus, and we're still going to do it with one more person, Rabbi Yossi. What the Gemorah is doing is this. It says, the rules of Mishnah are that if a Mishnah does not have any names of rabbis within it, we call it a stam Mishnah. Stam, most people translate stam as, just so. But really what stam in this context means is that it's universal. It's accepted universally. So a so-called stam Mishnah, you anticipate that there is nobody from that generation who had an issue with this topic. Otherwise, they would have been recorded as a dissenting voice. So the principle about Mishnah, at least the part of it that we're examining now, which is the first part of the Mishnah, the principle is that if you've got an item of monetary value, okay, so the word that we're using for an item of monetary value is the same word we use for money, mamoin. Okay, so you've got an item of monetary value where there is doubt as to who deserves ownership over that item, and we have no evidence to support either claim. So essentially that puts both claims in exactly equal footing. Question is, what do you do with that? Our Mishnah says what you do is you schlep both of these people to the court. In front of the court, they're going to have to take an oath, and only if they're willing to put themselves out and take this oath, then based on their respective claims, we'll divide this item of monetary value. So simply put, if you don't have witnesses, which are the highest form of evidence, the next best thing that you could use is an oath, and that will squeeze the truth out of the two contenders, right? That's what we're assuming. We said that doesn't seem to fit with Sumchus, because we have evidence from other places in the Gemorah, or I should say other Mishnahs, because Sumchus is at the Mishnah level, where Sumchus is of the view that if you have something of monetary value that is in dispute, and there is no way to testify who's supposed to get it, Sumchus says, split the value between the two parties without an oath. There's the conflict. Without an oath. Our Mishnah says with an oath, and Sumchus says without an oath. That is the question we're tackling at this point. How come Sumchus is not listed in our Mishnah as a dissenting voice? Because it sounds like he says a very different thing to our Mishnah. Sounds like he works with a very different principle to our Mishnah. Sounds like he trusts people more than our Mishnah does. Or maybe he mistrusts people more than our Mishnah does. You could look at it either way. Because essentially he's saying don't take an oath. So does don't take an oath mean we take you at your word? Or does don't take an oath mean we don't trust you to take an oath? It's not going to help us. But either way, our Mishnah said, if you want to divide this item, you first got to take an oath. And Sumchus is saying, if you have no evidence, the fairest thing to do is cut the baby in half, like King Solomon, right? And that's it. That's the way you resolve this issue. As soon as the Gemorah raised that question, the Gemorah immediately balanced it with saying, whoa, hang on a second. Sumchus was not speaking in a vacuum. Sumchus is quoted in a series of cases. We only unpacked one of the cases, the ox that gores the cow. But there are other cases as well. And in each of those cases, Sumchus is in a debate. And he's debating with other sages who we just call the Chachamim or the Rabbanon. Okay? Now you would assume, if the issue is how do you deal with an item of monetary value that is in doubt, you would assume that if what Sumchus says is different to our Mishnah, then surely the people he disagrees with would be the same as our Mishnah. That's what you'd assume, right? Says the Gemara, I don't see that. What the sages say in those cases is also different to our Mishnah. So, same problem. In other words, you thought you were raising one question. Sounds actually like you're now raising two questions. Why? Because the principle that the Chachamim teach is Hamoitzi mechaveroi olav haraya, which, as we have established through all of our learning so far, is a highly solid logical principle. Hamoitzi mechaveroi If somebody wants to claim money or property from another person, the onus is on them to prove beyond doubt that they deserve that. So, if I'm saying you owe me money, you're going to say, and the law will be on your side, prove it. And if I can't prove it, I don't get nothing. I don't get a cent. Right? Now, that also seems to be really different to our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says, there's a moitzi mechaveiro. If somebody's trying to get something from somebody else, then just give him at least 50%. So the Gemorah said, no. You are comparing apples and pears. There is no similarity between what the sages are saying and the case in our Mishnah. Why? Because in our Mishnah, there is no moitzi and there is no chaveiroi. In other words, the rabbis are talking about a claim against somebody who has an item in their possession. Our Mishnah is talking about two people who are trying to prove possession. Nobody has an established right to this tallis. Therefore, nobody's really claiming from them. Different case. So it's not a question if they have a different rule in a different case, because it's a different case. Sumchas, on the other hand, seems more disturbing to us. Even more disturbing than we originally thought. Why? Because Sumchas says, look, I'm going to use the example of the ox that gored the cow, because that's the example that we're familiar with, and the item in question is the fetus. Because we know that the owner of the ox is responsible for damages to the cow. The whole question is he responsible for damages to the fetus? Because maybe the fetus was born before any of this happened, and it's not part of the claim. Okay? So, in that case, that fetus, does it have an owner? Is there somebody who can claim this is my cow's fetus?
Yeah.
Of course. The owner of the cow is automatically the owner of the fetus. Okay? So therefore it's pretty clear that the owner of the ox has potentially liability on the one hand. On the other hand, can anybody prove that the ox caused the abortion of the fetus? Nobody can. Nobody can. Which then means that, let's just call say the fetus is worth 1,000 rand, which means the potential amount that he should have to pay is 500 rand. Where is that 500 rand right now? The 500 rand that may be the penalty. Where is that 500 rand right now? It's in the pocket of
the owner of the cow.
The owner of the
cow.
Ox.
Yes.
Again, if he's liable, he has to pay. So then the 500 rand will go to the owner of the cow as a payment, as a penalty for damages. But right now, where's it sitting? In his pocket. Okay. And Sumchos is willing to say, look, we don't know what happened. So out of the 500 that you potentially owe this guy, we're going to take 250 and give it to him without any evidence at all. You see that? Sumchos is comfortable to do that. He's comfortable to say there's a potential penalty of 500. We don't know if you owe it, so we're going to halve that and give it to him without even making you take an oath, without even making the victim take an oath. If that's what Sumchos is willing to do in that case, surely in our case, where, as we've already discussed, nobody has established a right yet to the tallis, the whole thing is in question, surely then he won't require an oath. In other words, if he doesn't require an oath to take money out of somebody's pocket and give it to somebody else, just based on a doubt, if he's willing to go that far, surely he's willing to say, you two are squabbling over this tallis, we don't know how to resolve it, but neither of you has established ownership, so you know what, split it without an oath. Surely he would be different to our Mishnah.
With the fetus, they couldn't even give an oath because they did not see what happened.
Correct.
The oath is not in
Correct. Good. So they cannot make the oath because they didn't see what happened. Good point. Hold that thought. It's a very important point. But let's just go back. Are you seeing how this is such a big question over here at this point? Okay, good. Now we'll look at the answer, which is going to be similar to what you said. Okay. So that puts us on page 16. And before we can examine what the Gemorah actually says, let's familiarize ourselves both with the dictionary and with, as you can see over here, 4 very valuable principles. So here's the dictionary. First, the word ki. Now, ki in Hebrew has multiple meanings, whereas ki in Aramaic generally has one meaning. So what does ki mean in Hebrew? Because, right? Is the most common, is because. But there's other words as well. There's other translations as well. Rashi tells us that the word ki in Hebrew, or at least in Torah language, could also mean when. In Aramaic, the word ki means when. Okay? Ki means when. Okay, good. What does the word tema mean?
Wonder.
Okay, in Hebrew it would be wonder, and it would have a hey at the end. So if you use the word tema in Hebrew, it would be surprise. Right? Now, the reason that that's valuable for Gemorah is because sometimes the Gemorah might say ve tema. And that's very strange. Then we'll have a hey at the end. Whereas the word tema with an aleph at the end means to say. It's one of the variations of the word to say. To say. Okay? Okay, so tema is to say, and ki is when. That then introduces us here to our first phrase that we're going to learn today, which is afilu tema. Afilu means even, right? So that's a Hebrew word. We're familiar with it. Afilu tema means you could even say. You could even say. Now, what's happening at this point is the Gemorah has asked a question, or maybe even better to say, has posed a kasha. And the kasha is, how could you possibly synchronize Sumchus and our Mishnah? Okay? How could it, right? Now, if you remember the language that the Gemorah used to introduce this was, Lema, let us say, Masnisin deloi Sumchus, that our Mishnah does not follow the opinion of Sumchus. Our response to that is, afilu tema, you could even say that our Mishnah fits with Sumchus, or you could even say that Sumchus agrees with our Mishnah. Okay, afilu tema. So this is an expression that introduces an answer to the kind of kasha that said incompatible opinions, and afilu tema says, well, I could illustrate how they could be compatible opinions. Okay? Afilu tema. Now, in order to get your afilu tema, what you've got to do is you've got to say ki omar. So what's ki? When. So ki omar, when did Sumchus say that you don't need an oath? Under certain circumstances. But because the circumstances of our Mishnah are very different circumstances, even Sumchus will accept that you need an oath. That's where we're going with this. So ki omar is basically it's a framing of a particular statement. Say ki omar, when did his opinion apply? Under what circumstances does he take that view? Right? Ki omar. Under what circumstances did he take that view? Okay? So now the entire answer is going to hinge on this term, and this is a term that is used very frequently in Talmudic discussion. It's the term bari v'shema. Okay, so we're going to ask Yossi. Yossi in Hebrew. If you want to say obviously, what do you say? Okay, another way that you could say it? Another way. Barur.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Barur. Clearly, obviously. Okay, so in Hebrew you say barur. In Aramaic you would say bari. Not to be confused with a bari, which has an aleph at the end. In Hebrew that means healthy. Here the word bari means certain. Certain. Shema is uncertain. And we have a principle. That's not the principle we're going to be talking about over here, but I'm going to just share with you anyway. So the principle goes like this. Bari v'shema, bari adif. It's a very logical principle. Let's say two people come in front of a court. The one person makes a claim that they can say with certainty. So the one person comes along and says, I definitely lent him money. That's bari, right? That's a claim made with certainty. To which the respondent says, I'm not sure, but I think I paid him back. That is shema. That is an uncertain claim. So the halacha would be bari v'shema. If I've got a certain claim against an uncertain claim, bari adif. Then the certain claim is obviously the one we're going to take more seriously. And effectively, we're going to tell this guy, if you don't come up with something better than that, you're going to have to pay. And even if in your mind you think you're paying again, it doesn't make a difference, you're going to have to pay, because you haven't been able to show certainty that you have discharged your debt. Okay? So those are the two terms, bari and shema. I'd like to ask you, in our Mishnah, where the two people are standing in front of the courts, holding on to a talis, are they making bari claims or are they making shema claims?
Bari. The first one where they're both saying it's mine.
Okay?
It's bari.
They're both saying that. Okay, fine. Now, in the case of the ox that gored the cow, the one guy is saying, listen, your ox caused my cow to abort this fetus. And the other guy is saying, my ox did not get cause your cow to abort the fetus. Are those bari or shema claims?
Shema.
Why are they shema? Because nobody can prove it. Nobody can prove it. Okay? So, let's have a look. Oh, sorry, there's one more phrase we have to look at. My ika lemeimar. If you have to translate it very literally, the word my means what? Ika, there is, lemeimar, to say. Now, basically, my ika lemeimar, as you see over here, introduces a kasha, which basically says like this. Okay, fine, I get your logic. It answers the question. But if I introduce another variable into this conversation, then I'm going to challenge you. Now, my ika lemeimar, what will you say now? Okay, so right now that might sound a little bit abstract. It's fine. Once we see the piece in the Gemorah, it will start to make sense. Okay, so where are we in the story? Right now we're at the point where we think that there's a massive kashya from the opinion of Sumchus to our Mishnah. Because Sumchus is willing to take money out of somebody's pocket without an oath, surely he'd be willing to divide a talis that's in question without an oath. That's the question we're coming from. Answers the Gemorah. Afilu tema Sumchus. I will show you a logical proposal that our Mishnah could even fit with the opinion of Sumchus, that there would be no debate, no disparity between what Sumchus and our Mishnah have to say. How will I show you that? Because ki omar Sumchus, when does Sumchus say that you split the item or the money without an oath? In a case of shema v'shema, as you correctly just said, where in the case both litigants are not even sure of their own claim. In other words, the owner of the cow is saying, maybe your ox is the reason that the fetus was aborted. And the owner of the ox is saying, maybe not. And there's no clarity in either of their minds. Now, why do you think that's going to influence Sumchus to say, split without an oath?
When both claims are equal.
Both claims are equal in our Mishnah also. But what about the nature of those claims makes it reasonable that Sumchus should say, split it without an oath?
We're not arguing that the ox gored the cow.
Right. And there's no debate about the fact that he has to pay that penalty.
Yeah.
So that's not where Sumchus is using his logic, right? His logic is specifically about the fetus.
But we're saying something happened with the fetus. Is it the ox's fault or is it?
So can we just step out of the case for a moment and talk about the level of certainty in the mind of each litigant? Let's just talk about that as if we divorce from the case. Just the level of certainty, because he's calling it shema and shema. That means I'm on shaky ground and you're on shaky ground, and we're debating this in the court. Why do you think that would prompt Sumchus to say they don't have to take an oath? Because they can't take an oath. How can you take an oath which is so serious, which invokes Hashem's name, which basically puts your head on the block to say what I'm saying is absolutely what I believe, if you're saying outright, I don't know what happened. By definition, if your argument is a Shema argument, there is no space for an oath. That's not a debate with our Mishnah. That's just a recognition of the reality of their case. You can't swear about something you admit you don't know. So, Ki Omar Sumchas. Under what circumstances does Sumchas say that you divide the object or the value of the object without an oath? Shema v'shema. If each person is not sure of their claim, and by default, if they're not sure of their claim, they cannot swear about their claim. Avol bori ubori, but a case like our Mishnah, where each of them has literally drawn a line in the sand and said, I believe this. I know what happened. I'm telling you this is what happened. Ani mitzasiha. I'm the guy who found this tallis. I don't know where this meshugana came from. Kula sheli. It's 100% mine. Does that not sound like a certainty? Okay, fine. You're so certain. Lo yomar. Simcha's not going to say you get a freebie over here. If you're so certain, put your money where your mouth is. Stand up in front of the court. Place your hand on the Torah scroll. Use Hashem's name. Stand by your claim. Because you're making a claim of certainty. So it's now abundantly clear that Sumchos and our Mishnah are not in conflict because they're talking about radically different circumstances.
And they're covering themselves because they're saying less, no less.
That is the mechanism the court is using to make it a viable oath, which we're still going to learn about. But they, from their perspective, are willing to swear outright. It's just that we're not allowing them to. But they're willing to do it. Makes sense, right? If Gemorah was only that easy.
Unless there's like a crazy option. The one saying that he found it, the other was saying that one found it was his initially.
True, but we're not seeing that in the Mishnah, because the Mishnah says that the found it is matched by found it, and that it is all is mine is matched with all is mine. But you're 100% right. If the person says I found it, and the other one says it's mine, that would be a different conversation. Okay. So the Gemara asks a question, Rabba bar Rav Huna. You know, all of these debates that run through various other Gemorahs between the Chachamim and Sumchus, all on the basis of, is the main thing to divide something in doubt, or is the main thing that you don't get a cent until you can prove it? So there's obviously a lot of Gemorah on all of those Mishnahs, and they appear in multiple scenarios. So there's a lot of Gemorah. In all of that Gemorah, you come across an opinion of somebody called Rabba bar Rav Huna. Or the Rabba bar Rav Huna, according to Rabba bar Rav Huna, the Omar, who said, Omar Sumchus afilu bari ubari, that Sumchus would hold the same rules apply even in a case where each party claims certainty. My Ika lemeimar, how would Rabba bar Rav Huna understand Sumchus in the light of our Mishnah? And as we've given a good answer, we've said our Mishnah and the Sumchus cases are different. But Rabba bar Rav Huna believes that Sumchus would apply the same rule even if they did have a certain claim. And if they had certainty in their claim, that's the case of our Mishnah. If that's the case of our Mishnah, and Sumchus in a case of certainty, according to Rabba bar Rav Huna, would still say you don't need an oath, we're back to square one. So according to you, Rabba bar Rav Huna, now you see how pointed this particular kasha is. This is no longer a generic kasha, like how does the Gemara understand the Mishnah? This is a pointed kasha at Rabba bar Rav Huna, according to you and your theory of how Sumchus thinks, we're back to square one. Because you're saying that in a case of bari ubari, where each claimant believes that they have an absolute claim, you would still allow them to split it without an oath. What about us? And so to answer that, the Gemara is going to introduce a new concept. As you will see on page 17, this concept is understood differently by Rashi and by Tosfos. Now, fortunately, you might say, I would say unfortunately, we are not yet learning the Gemara with every Rashi and Tosfos. We're doing a little dip here and there into a bit of Rashi and Tosfos, which is unfortunate. But this is a great opportunity for us just to get a taste of a classic difference of views between Rashi and Tosafos in analyzing a particular piece of Gemorah. Okay, so what are we going to answer now? Remember, we've dealt with Sumchus versus our Mishnah according to pretty much every opinion. We've just got Rabba Bar Rav Huna, who has another way of understanding Sumchus, and we've got to settle his view. If we can't settle his view, what's going to happen? Let's assume we can't find an answer to Rabba Bar Rav Huna's opinion. What's going to happen?
You have to follow the Mishnah.
You have to follow the Mishnah, and therefore
He's allowed it.
he, Rabba Bar Rav Huna, who is from the Gemorah, who does not have the authority to disagree with the Mishnah. So if Rabba Bar Rav Huna's interpretation of Sumchus cannot align with our Mishnah, it will discredit his view. So it's pretty important for Rabba Bar Rav Huna's view at this point that we can validate his view in the context of the Mishnah, because if we can't, then we are dismissing his view entirely. Okay? Again, if Sumchus and our Mishnah did not see eye to eye, that's okay. They're both from the same period in the Mishnah, and they should just then be recorded in the same Mishnah as two opinions. But now we're talking about Rabba Bar Rav Huna. He's an Amoira. He's from the time of the Gemorah. He cannot say anything which is misaligned with the Mishnah. If he cannot fit his view and interpretation of Sumchus into our Mishnah, and therefore, if he suggests that Sumchus and our Mishnah disagree, yet our Mishnah does not acknowledge that, he must have misunderstood Sumchus. So the stakes are high right now for this approach of Rabba Bar Rav Huna. Needless to say, of course, the Gemara expects him to be able to defend his position. So, one word and one phrase that we need for this next piece. Heicha. Heicha. Any idea what that is? Heicha. Okay, so the word heicha is where. And very often it will appear, as it does over here, in the context of heicha de. Where that. Okay? But the next phrase is going to be the really, really tricky part of this entire piece of Gemorah. It's called Dirara de Mamona. Okay, let's start with the second word first because it's easier. De Mamoina. Let's break it apart. You've got a prefix, you've got a suffix. Let's remove them. What's the word in the middle? Mamoin, money, right? De Mamona, of money. Dirara, de, of or from money. The question is, what is Dirara? Okay? What is Dirara? Now, let's play a game over here for a second. Let's play just a phonetics game. Is there any word in English that comes to your mind? Just be as creative as you can. When you hear a word like Dirara, is there any word to draw? Okay, good. So Dirara de Mamona means something that like drags along money, draws out the money. Okay? It's an interesting expression. Like I say, Rashi and Tosafos are going to have two different versions of what exactly this concept is. So let's have a look at what Dirara de Mamona means in the most generic sense. Then we'll learn the piece of the Gemorah. Then we'll look at the specifics of Rashi and Tosafos. Dirara de Mamona, we're going to translate right now, for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to translate it as potential monetary loss. Okay? Dirara de Mamona. Potential monetary loss. With that translation, in which case is there potential monetary loss? In our Mishnah, were the two people fighting over the Tallis? Or in the ox that gored the cow, and obviously there's a dead cow and a dead fetus. In which case is there potential monetary loss? What I mean is, if we mismanage in the court, if we mismanage this case, in which of the two scenarios is the potential monetary loss?
Second is.
The fetus, right? Why do you say there's no monetary loss in the case of the Tallis?
Because it didn't belong to you.
Exactly. You can't lose something you've never had. It can't cost you not to get a windfall. That's not considered Dirara de Mamona. It's an opportunity lost. But it's not an item lost, not an asset lost. Okay? So in its broadest sense, that's what we call Dirara de Mamona. Okay. Right. So we are concerned about a potential loss of money. Fine. Let's get into how Rabba Bar Rav Huna is understanding the thought process of Sumchus. So Sumchus looks at this case. There's now a dead cow and a dead fetus lying in the road, and we're 100% clear on which ox caused the death of the cow, that's not even in question. We just don't know if the fetus was part of that accident or not. Okay? If we as the court get this wrong, now getting this wrong means either we award a penalty to a victim who actually doesn't deserve it, because that miscarriage happened before there was the attack of the ox. And if we don't award the money, potentially we're making him lose the value of his fetus, because the fetus was lost as an abortion because of the attack of the ox, right? So whichever way we play this, if we're not doing it right, somebody potentially loses money, right? Okay. In our case of the two people fighting over the tallis, if we, for example, decide we're giving them each 50% of the tallis, is anybody losing money? No. If we decided to confiscate the tallis, let's just say theoretically, to confiscate the tallis and give nobody the tallis, would anybody lose money? No. No. If the court decided that we like so-and-so more than we like the other guy, so we're giving him the tallis, it's obviously not a way to run a court, but has anybody lost money? No. Okay, so there's no durara dumamana in that case.
The one that lost the tallis will have to go and buy another tallis.
Of course, but the person who lost the tallis is not standing in the court. So the court is not making him lose money. He's lost his tallis already. That's not because of the court. Okay. Now, what is the hesitation to make somebody take an oath? What's the hesitation to make somebody take an oath?
It's got serious consequences.
If he's wrong, it's got serious consequences. Okay? So that's his hesitation. His hesitation to take the oath is that if he makes an oath and it's not true, that's got serious consequences. What is our hesitation to administer the oath?
Making somebody take Hashem's name in vain.
Okay, is that our only consideration? It's definitely a consideration, 100%. Is that our only consideration, that we might be forcing somebody to take Hashem's name in vain?
Isn't there a thing of, I heard somewhere where it's like, you're the court who's, you actually, it's actually a scandal of God that you actually get to this point.
Okay.
To actually have to administer this oath.
True.
You're failing in your duty.
True. What else? What else are we worried about?
That he's wrong.
And?
He's convinced, but he's wrong.
Okay, and therefore he's taking Hashem's name in vain.
But
Okay, it's the same. That's true. But what else could go wrong here? Think of the exact opposite.
They both take it out.
So here's another possibility. There are two people fighting over this tallis. The one person is a pretty sheepish, highly moral person. And the other guy's a bit of a bully. Okay? So the bully latches onto the tallis after the other guy's already holding onto the tallis, let's just say. Right? Now the court says you've got to take an oath. If you want this tallis, you've got to take the oath. The bully doesn't care. He's happy to take an oath because in his mind he thinks he deserves the tallis for all the psychological reasons we already saw before. He's not losing out. What's the big deal? Blah, 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 whatever. The guy who's a little bit more, who's got more of a conscience, I don't know if I want to take an oath. I'll be perfectly honest. If the occasion arose that I had to stand in front of a court to take an oath, I'd probably just pay the money. I don't want to play with this. This is heavy stuff. So the other fear that the court has is, if we're going to administer an oath, it could actually cheat somebody out of money they deserve. Because it might force them to step back and say, drop charges. I'm not going to make this claim. Because I don't want to have on my conscience that I used Hashem's name. I don't want to do it. Okay? So, plug that into the way Rabbi Bar Rav Huna understands Sumchus. If the court's administering an oath in our Mishnah, where the two guys are holding on to the tallis, if that's going to cause somebody to get cold feet and step back, are they losing money because of that? In our case of the tallis. So the guy was like all gung-ho, it's my tallis, 100%, whatever. Now the court says, fine, here's the Torah, put your hand on, take it. And he doesn't want to do that? No loss. But in the other case, let's say that the court is going to tell the guy who's claiming, listen, I think you killed my a cow and its fetus. Say, what? Swear. I don't want to swear. He potentially is going to lose money now. Not because he deserves to lose that money. To the contrary, it's because he's such a decent guy. Because he's not 100% clear in what he believes happened. Because remember, Rabbi Bar Rav Huna is saying he claimed he knows. It is a Bari case. His statement to the Beis Din was, I know for sure that it was an abortion because of the attack of that ox of his. I know that for sure. Okay, swear. Swear is a different story. Everybody's very sure of themselves until they have to be potentially, guilty of perjury. So now, if we're going to enforce the oath, we might actually make him lose money. So Simcha says, you know what? We're not going to make an oath over here. Whereas in our Mishnah, where nobody stands to lose, okay. So the oath might smoke out a person who's less convinced of their opinion. So, what's the big deal? He's not going to lose money. That would be Rabbi Bar Rav Huna's explanation of how Sumchus could still dovetail with our Mishnah. Does that make sense?
Say it again.
It's a lot of stuff. Okay, so let's go back. We're saying, according to Rabbi Bar, let's go back one step before that. Our previous answer was, obviously our Mishnah and the Simchas Mishnah are different scenarios. Because our Mishnah, each person is absolutely confident in their claim. If you're confident in your claim, take an oath. In that case, nobody's confident in their claim. We don't know what happened. Okay, obviously you can't take an oath. That was our first answer. We said that's all fine and good until you learn Rabbi Bar Rav Huna. Because Rabbi Bar Rav Huna says that even if the two claimants are certain of their claim, Sumchus would still not require an oath of them. How then are you going to explain our Mishnah? Because even then our Mishnah would be different. Why? Because there's another consideration. This is not only about analyzing the certainty of their claims, it's also about analyzing the potential fallout if we rule incorrectly. Part of ruling incorrectly could mean forcing somebody who feels strongly about their case to take an oath, which may make them feel less strongly about presenting their case. In other words, they still feel strongly about their case. They don't feel so strongly about taking the risk of making an oath. And if they're not willing to do that, if it's going to cost them money, it's not fair to make them take that oath. So when is Simchas going to say no oath? When he's afraid that the oath could force somebody to lose money that they deserve. When does Simcha say, I don't care if there's no oath? Sorry, where does Simcha say, I don't care if you make them take an oath?
Shema.
It's in a Bari case with no loss of money.
Yeah.
Where each person only stands to walk out with an advantage, to only walk out with a gain. Okay, so I don't care now to make you take an oath that you potentially could lose that opportunity. Opportunity cost is not a thing. It's not reason enough to step back from a process, from a legal process. So let's read it inside. Afilu teima sumchus. You could even say that Sumchus and our Mishnah agree. Why would we say that? Ki omar Sumchus. When is it that Sumchus says no oath? I don't even use the word necessary, but no oath should be part of this process. Heichaweh de'ika, that there is durara de mamana, potential financial loss. But any scenario where there won't be potential financial loss, Loi Sumchus is not worried about an oath and is happy for you to apply the oath to that case. Let's have a look. This is obviously a highly summarized version of Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi is not all that long, but the Tosfos is a bit longer. So let's read. Rashi says that the definition of Drara de Mamona is this: the defendant stands to lose money he doesn't owe. Right? In other words, the guy who owns the ox, potentially, if you make the oath, well, whatever the case is that he potentially is going to have to pay money that he doesn't owe, right? And the claimant stands to lose the value of his animal if he's unable to claim. So in other words, Rashi is defining drora de mamana, that the nature of the case, even before you get to the oath, the nature of the case is both parties potentially could lose money. Okay, the owner of the attacking ox potentially could lose money for damages he shouldn't have to pay for, and the owner of the attacked cow potentially could lose money that he should have gotten as reparation. So that's Rashi's understanding of Drara Demamana, which is pretty much what we have discussed, right? That's how we defined it till now. Let's look at Tosfos. Tosfos says Drara Demamana means the uncertainty of the case is not caused by the claims of the litigants, i.e. any observer would be unsure of what happened. That's how Tosfos is seeing this. In other words, Tosfos is seeing, again, it's a long Tosfos, not longish, I mean, by Tosfos standards, not so long, but it's longer than what we're seeing over here. Tosfos is saying, what's going on over here is this. It's not a matter of will he lose money, won't he lose money. The idea of Drara Demamana is that the case is a case that fundamentally you could never prove. You could never fundamentally prove who, did the ox gore the cow before the baby was miscarried or not. Can't prove it. There's nobody there. So if there's nobody there, the financial load of this case is so heavy that Sumchus says we don't want to mess it up by applying an oath. Whereas our case with the Tallis, the uncertainty is not caused. The uncertainty over here is caused by the claim. The claim is what causes the uncertainty. I say it's mine. I say it's mine. Okay, now we have a problem. There, even if the guy was claiming differently, we still have a problem because nobody saw what happened. But here, the whole uncertainty is because each person is making an identical claim. So, Drara Demamana means where there is something independent that affects the nature of this money, we won't have an oath. Something independent means, forget about what the people are saying. We're now the crime investigation unit standing over there at the dead cow and the dead fetus, and we can't tell what happened. So therefore you don't apply an oath. Whereas in the case of the two people holding onto the Tallis, the whole case only starts when they walk through the door. It only starts when they say, my Tallis, my Tallis, my Tallis. Okay, so the entire case is built on these two people. If the entire case is built on these two people, make these two people swear, then we'll know what happened. Whereas in the other case, making them swear is still not going to tell us what happened. In other words, it's like a nuanced thing. It's not about Shem over Shem. It's not that each one is claiming, I think, I don't know, I'm not sure. It's that the case by definition cannot be resolved in a court. In other words, you can't achieve the clarity in the court. Whereas the other case, you can. Maybe one guy will back down and say, actually, I didn't really find it first. I took a chance over here, whatever the case is. So in other words, when do you apply an oath? When the oath can squeeze the truth out of somebody. When don't you apply an oath? Where there's no way to get the truth out of somebody because nobody was there to know the truth. And if you think that that's as complex as it gets, the Gemorah is going to still challenge this thinking.
So you can only apply an oath when an oath is going to might squeeze the truth